highly trained pilots encountering mysterious aircraft across the globe.
It was a highly maneuverable, intelligently controlled object in military airspace.
Astonishing unexplained sightings by NASA's astronauts.
If pilots are good UFO witnesses, then astronauts are great UFO witnesses.
This is Houston. Say again, 7. Report you at 3
New evidence never before seen on television has UFO researchers convinced that NASA is concealing the truth.
This very clearly demonstrates that we are dealing with something from another world.
As humanity explores beyond planet Earth, new scientific discoveries on Mars are raising important questions.
Mars was inhabited at one point, and what we see today is remnants of that civilization.
Is the government telling us all it knows about UFOs?
These UFO incidents pose serious national security issues. We ignore these sightings at our peril.
New evidence is transforming what people believe about extraterrestrial spacecraft. Are UFOs really visiting our world? Is the government hiding the truth? The answer to the mystery may lie in the sightings of pilots and astronauts. April 2007, Suffolk, England. Military air traffic controllers at the Lakenheath Air Force Base identify a strange anomaly in the nearby airspace. Visibility is excellent, and they immediately request the help of 2 pilots already in the air to investigate.
Pilots are from the base at Lakenheath, an American base, part of the wider US presence in the UK. These American pilots, they are ordered to intercept a UFO that has been picked up and tracked on military radar. News of this only leaked out because of the activities of a ham radio operator.
What you're about to hear is the actual exchange between the American pilots, recorded by the ham radio operator. This conversation has never been aired on television. Until now.
Dude, I have no idea what that is. No kidding. I just flew over on bullseye 008 for 20. I had a radar hit, and it was swinging. It looked like 30 knots. There was something there. Back towards you, dude. I can't tell. Something small, very small black object.
According to the pilots, the strange object moved from 17,000 feet up to 17,700 feet in altitude.
The pilots made a number of passes of this object to try and identify it. It's 17,000 feet up, and there's something in the skies unlike anything they've ever encountered before.
As one of the pilots finally gets close, he reports.
Copy. I saw it that time. I could not make out what it was.
It didn't look like a bird. It looked like, no kidding, a rock to me.
We have no explanation for what this thing was. So both F-15s had a radar lock on the object, and ground-based radar also was tracking it. So there was clearly something there. But it was a highly maneuverable, intelligently controlled object in military airspace that was not under the evident control of any military that we know.
At first, the authorities denied everything. But once that ham radio operator had made public the recording, it was undeniable.
When you hear the exchange of these pilots and they're saying that they don't know what this object is, you need to take that seriously. They know what they're looking at. This is highly unusual.
Pilot sightings are extremely important when it comes to an evaluation of the UFO phenomenon. These are trained observers operating to the highest skill level.
A lot of these pilots spend hundreds and thousands of hours in the air, so they know what it's supposed to look like up there.
This Lake and Heath incident is very interesting because you have pilots describing a rock that's floating and changing direction in the sky.
It had no wings, it had no tail, it had no means of propulsion, yet it was at high altitude, it moved around, it changed altitude, it did things that basically a rock is not capable of doing. So what was this thing doing in the sky? Nobody really knows.
But this aerial encounter is not an isolated incident, and UFO researchers say they're on the rise. July the 7th, 2010. Above the Chinese city of Hangzhou, southwest of Shanghai, a three-man flight crew on board an Air China passenger jet prepare for landing.
Chinese pilots, as they were approaching the airport, reported seeing an unusual object that got their attention and their concern.
The pilots report to air traffic control that an unknown object about 30 meters long and 10 meters wide is moving slowly through their airspace 2,000 feet above the airport.
At the same time, people on the ground photographed this object. There are several of these photographs, and they're very interesting. And they certainly appear to show an elongated object, and there's light coming down from the object.
The entire airport was closed. Flights were diverted. I mean, clearly something was going on in the skies.
You have to remember that there were witnesses in the air that saw the object as they were landing, and we have this photographic evidence. So all of that together tells me that there absolutely was a UFO. There's too much evidence to say that there wasn't.
Because of the prejudice against reporting these kinds of sightings, the pilots really took a huge risk by actually calling out over the open airwaves and saying that they'd seen this object. So for them to do that, they must have really seen something very unusual, and it was considered a threat to them.
2 weeks later, another UFO sighting is reported in the same airspace above the same Chinese city. This is an actual eyewitness video recording of the event. Observers describe the sighting as an eerie white light moving through the sky, leaving a bright trail in its wake.
It's been variously suggested that this was a rocket test, that perhaps some sort of secret military test was underway. It's also been theorized that this was the re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere of a rocket that had launched. I don't know if we'll ever have definitive answers, but it shows that these things are occurring, apparently with increasing regularity in our skies, and that they're a cause of some considerable concern to authorities all around the world.
You also got to consider that China is very militarized. It's a communist country. It does have a very intense air defense, and these objects penetrated that air defense, got into their airports, and actually created enough trouble to have them shut down the airport itself. That's a really big deal.
Investigators say the Chinese sightings are a clear indication that UFO encounters are on the rise. Yet more evidence of this alarming trend comes from sightings over Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula.
In early 2004, the Mexican Air Force was doing a routine drug interdiction flight over the southern part of Mexico.
This is the most famous case in the Mexican Air Force history. These pilots are looking for a traffic of drugs. They make these flights every day. In March 5th of 2004, they saw something that couldn't explain.
Comandante, ¿qué es eso? Ahí van más. Van más, siguen más atrás.
They were using forward-looking infrared, FLIR, and radar, and tracked on their instrumentation, but did not see visually 11 objects.
Flying at about 10,000 feet, the crew records and monitors the UFOs while reporting the sightings to ground control. This is the actual video feed recorded by the Mexican Air Force.
Me sigue marcando la distancia el radar a 37 millas.
We're looking at the target imagery of these objects that are tracking along with the airplane. Where's the airplane? Longitude and latitude here. Azimuth, aperture, angle in the sky and the horizon so that this target tells us exactly what the position and the angle is, what we're looking at, what the position of the airplane is. Now we have other objects that are coming up that are much closer, that are moving in between the clouds, tracking along with the airplane.
The radar detects movements. That means that the objects have mass.
Los tenemos adelante, en medio y a las 8.
The objects make intelligent movements.
¿Qué cosa tan rara, eh?
It would appear that these objects are either intelligent or intelligently controlled because they appear to be communicating with each other as they are following the aircraft.
This airplane was flying over 200 miles per hour. Then it's incredible that this UFO is moving faster, circling the airplane.
It's a fascinating piece of footage. One can see quite clearly these UFOs apparently moving at high speed, and here they are showing up on military cameras.
After the incident, the Mexican government releases a press statement and the footage from the encounter.
Oftentimes, the government keeps the pilots quiet and don't talk anything about the UFOs. But in this case, we make a press conference. The Mexican Air Force, with this case, recognized that the UFOs exist.
Nunca me había pasado y es algo así que, pues no sabré qué decir, qué era.
It's been suggested that these objects are nothing more than the flares from oil rigs. To me, it didn't stack up.
We're left with an object that was tracked at a high enough altitude, much higher up than what you would get by looking down at oil rigs. So I'm not really convinced by that explanation.
The FLIR camera is always looking above the horizon. I'm a scientist, I'm an astronomer. I didn't believe in UFOs, but this video changed my mind.
Because of the testimony from the pilots, because of the footage, because of the way these objects were moving and behaving, this case very clearly demonstrates that we are, in all likelihood, dealing with something from another world.
No estamos solos. No estamos solos,
UFO researchers believe there is undeniable evidence that sightings of extraterrestrial craft worldwide are on the rise. The only question is why. It's not just pilots in the sky who are encountering strange aircraft. Dozens of mysterious UFO sightings have been reported by astronauts, many captured on live video feeds that were mysteriously interrupted. Could there be reason to fear that they represent a clear and present danger? For decades, there have been countless reports of UFOs in the skies. And since humanity first ventured beyond Earth's atmosphere, there have also been numerous UFO sightings in space, reported by astronauts and scientists. NASA's inability to provide adequate explanations for these sightings has led researchers to suspect a cover-up, and perhaps even a UFO conspiracy. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, was established on July the 29th, 1958. Beyond the space race, NASA's mission was to pioneer the future of space exploration.
The point of NASA is to make sure that the United States stays as a world leader in science, particularly focusing on space, aeronautics, and the search for life.
As technical and scientific observers, astronauts are trained to the highest standards.
In a sense, of course, astronauts are elite pilots. They are generally selected from the top ranks of military pilot community, and these people are the best of the best.
They're the ones who have the right stuff. And when an astronaut makes a UFO report or sees what he or she thinks is a UFO, we really need to take that seriously.
If pilots are good UFO witnesses, then astronauts are great UFO witnesses.
Project Mercury, NASA's first manned space program. On May the 15th, 1963, the last of the program's 6 missions lifts off from Launch Complex 14 at Florida's Cape Canaveral.
Project Mercury was part of the space race. It was the first US project to put people in space and ideally beat the Russians.
Piloting the Mercury spacecraft known as Faith 7 is 30-year-old Major Gordon Cooper. He's an aerospace engineer and an Air Force test pilot who's logged more than 7,000 hours, flying all manner of airplanes, helicopters, and experimental jet fighters.
Gordon Cooper is one of the most famous astronauts in U.S. history, rightly so. And aboard the final Mercury mission, he did a record 22 orbits around the Earth.
Cooper's 34-hour spaceflight is over 3 times longer than any of the previous Mercury missions. But on his last orbit, the astronaut has a very strange and unnerving experience.
He reported to NASA there was a bright, green, glowing object that approached his capsule, and it zoomed by him. And, I mean, it's just an extraordinary sighting.
Now, for someone like Cooper, highly trained astronaut, to report something like this, clearly it's something out of the ordinary.
What the heck did Gordon Cooper see? There's nothing supposed to be up there in 1963, let alone something that's green and glowing, let alone something that's supposed to approach his craft. He's one of the top observers in the world. He was an experienced pilot, and he's out there in space, and something at the beginning of our space age buzzes by his capsule. Wow.
Although NASA ground control dismisses the sighting as some sort of optical illusion, the UFO is picked up by an Australian radar tracking station. But after Cooper and his capsule are recovered from the Pacific Ocean, something remarkable happens.
What's interesting to me is that when he got down on Earth again, no one asked him about it.
Before Cooper even returned, it was made clear to reporters that they could not ask him about the UFO sighting. NASA would only do this if there was some incredibly important piece of information being released that they wouldn't want out there.
Clearly, NASA was very uncomfortable with him describing what he saw. So if space is exactly what they tell us it is, this big empty void with nothing out there, then why do they need to suppress one of their own best and brightest from talking about what he saw?
Despite Cooper's observations in space, NASA's official transcript of the mission bears no mention of the mysterious sighting. 2 years later, on board Gemini 7, another similar sighting is witnessed by 2 very experienced astronauts, Frank Borman and Jim Lovell.
Gemini followed Project Mercury. It was the next step in putting people into space. Gemini 7 was the 4th flight, and one of the goals of this project was to study the effects of 14 days in space on humans.
Early in the mission, during just their 2nd orbit of Earth, Borman and Lovell see something highly unusual. Jim Lovell reports to Mission Control that he sees an unidentified spacecraft nearing their capsule.
This is Houston. Say again, 7.
Suddenly, the live broadcast of the conversation is interrupted by NASA.
Houston at 4 hours, 24 minutes, 84.
Despite the cut in transmission, here for the first time on television is NASA's official transcript of the conversation that continued.
They ask him, well, is it the booster rocket that was from the craft? And he says, no, I see the booster. That was in his sight. This was a different object.
They are talking about something else that isn't the booster. For want of a better expression, it's a UFO.
Each time astronauts speak to Mission Control about unidentified flying objects, the transmission abruptly ends.
Communication between NASA and the astronauts in space. They have several different channels. And so if they're using a public channel and they see something, they would automatically have them switch over to another channel.
Does the evidence suggest that NASA intentionally cut public communications with their astronauts after they reported seeing UFOs in space? And if so, why would NASA and the US government choose to keep such sightings secret? Some UFO researchers believe there may have been an ulterior motive to the formation of the space program in the first place.
I believe that NASA knew when they were forming that there was actually these sort of extraterrestrial events happening around our planet. And I believe that they knew from the inception that they were going to go into space with the idea of contacting some sort of extraterrestrial life.
There are reports of NASA lying about the time and the place astronauts were available for conversations, whether they were in communication with the spacecraft or not. There's all kinds of things you can go through the record and find that NASA was duplicitous on, at the very least, and certainly not completely honest.
Could the space race, in fact, have been a race to contact extraterrestrials that the government already knew existed? The answer may be hidden in the archives of NASA's missions to the moon, and some newly discovered recordings long hidden by the government. UFO sightings have been witnessed in our skies and beyond in NASA's early missions into space. Now, shocking new evidence of UFOs has been found amongst records of NASA's greatest achievement: the moon landings. July the 20th, 1969, a new era in space exploration is launched when a massive Saturn rocket lifts off from NASA's Kennedy Space Center.
The Apollo program was all about going to the moon, and the culmination of that effort was Apollo 11. The Apollo 11 mission had 3 astronauts, Michael Collins, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong. And the lunar module went down to the surface of the moon and outstepped 2 astronauts, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, to touch the surface of another world for the first time.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Every moment of their lunar encounter makes history worldwide. But according to one former NASA communications engineer, it's what wasn't made public that is the real story of the mission. In 1975, 6 years after the Apollo 11 moon landing, Maurice Chatelain came forward with an extraordinary claim in his book, Our Cosmic Ancestors.
Maurice Chatelain is a retired NASA communications specialist, and he went public with sensational claims that when Armstrong and Aldrin landed on the surface of the moon, there were UFOs there watching their every move.
Chatelain had stated that he was in a secret room during the Apollo 11 moon landings, and that he witnessed a recording from the surface of the moon of the astronauts talking about the fact that they weren't alone.
According to Chatelain, after the astronauts stepped onto the moon for the first time, they reported seeing 2 UFOs hovering overhead at about 15,000 feet.
And there's reference to these objects just watching what's unfolding. This is a pivotal point in human history, and it seems that extraterrestrials were there to watch.
Is it conceivable that NASA and the US government decided to keep this incredible encounter a secret? As many critics point out, how would that even be possible with TV cameras rolling non-stop and billions of people on Earth watching the event on live television? Incredibly, there is a gap in what was broadcast to the public.
There's 2 minutes of silence in this transmission, 2 missing minutes. And NASA says this was just an equipment malfunction caused by overheating cameras. The suspicion must be that some sort of classified, secret conversation was going on during these 2 minutes, which still to this day has not been made public.
All official details of what the government may have learned about UFOs during the 2 missing minutes on the moon have remained ultra top secret. Chatelain also claims in his book that leading up to the moon landings, all Apollo and Gemini missions were followed by UFOs, and that each time, the astronauts were ordered never to speak about their encounters.
The problem with Chatelain's story is he wasn't actually working for NASA during the Apollo moon landings. What's the truth? Is NASA lying about when he was there? Is Chatelain lying? Nobody really knows for sure. But at least there were a couple pieces of evidence that were starting to come together that shows maybe there was much more than the public story.
Significantly, Buzz Aldrin himself has lent credibility to these claims of UFO sightings.
Aldrin, over the years, has certainly confirmed that he's seen some strange things that he couldn't explain.
When Buzz Aldrin published his book and he talked about a UFO that they saw on approach to the moon outside of their capsule window, I think that lends a lot of credibility that maybe there is more to the story.
Does the evidence suggest that Armstrong and Aldrin really did encounter UFOs on the moon? And if so, did they make contact with an alien intelligence, as UFO researchers believe?
I don't think NASA knew that there was somebody else on the moon when we first landed. But when we got to the moon, I think we were being observed the entire time.
There is indeed a theory that extraterrestrials would only be interested in making contact with us at the point at which we've developed viable space travel, and landing on the moon might just be the trigger point.
If NASA is aware of the lunar UFOs, why are they keeping it secret? Is it possible the government is trying to covertly make contact with extraterrestrial beings?
Were these astronauts sent there to intercept something, to meet with something? Did they know that they were actually going to see these objects? And why don't we know this information?
Further clues may be found 2 decades after the moon landings, at the height of NASA's space shuttle program.
2, 1, we have booster ignition and liftoff.
Officially, the space shuttle's chief mission was to carry large payloads into orbit, maintain satellites, and perform scientific experiments. But researchers have recently discovered that on March the 13th, 1989, something extraordinary happened aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery.
Space Shuttle has always had a certain number of very classified components to every one of its missions. You know, there are public missions and there are classified missions. And we don't really know what they're doing up there.
20 hours into the mission at 6:42 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the following message was sent by Shuttle Commander Colonel John Blaha, a veteran Air Force pilot turned astronaut.
Houston, this is Discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under abhorrence.
The astonishing admission of a UFO in close proximity to the shuttle was recorded by a member of the Goddard Amateur Radio Club, which monitors all NASA space flights.
Houston, this is Discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under abhorrence.
After that, the public transmission ends abruptly. According to UFO investigators, that's when NASA switched communications to a secure channel.
Are the space shuttles being used in one way or another to observe or interact with these objects that are out there? I think it's totally possible. There are objects that do certainly appear to be maneuvering in Earth orbit. And these are not so simple to explain.
We have a witness, the caliber of this shuttle commander, making statements like this. Then you throw on the fact that this isn't an isolated incident. So one has to surmise that there is actually something up there interacting with these astronauts.
There is just an exceptional amount of what we don't know about the cosmos. So yes, it could be some kind of a craft that they're seeing, or it could be a natural explanation, something that we haven't discovered yet.
Researchers contend that despite NASA's best efforts, credible evidence of UFO sightings is mounting.
You put everything together. You have the early Mercury observations by Gordon Cooper. You have the Gemini 7. You have Blaha's observations. You have this ton of evidence stacked up.
With space sightings on the rise, researchers have now begun to question the true purpose of the International Space Station. Could it be a platform to gather data on UFOs? The International Space Station is the most complex science and engineering project in history. And it's easily the largest structure humanity has ever put into space.
The International Space Station project began in 1998 and has been built upon since then.
Permanently occupied by US and international crews, the space station primarily serves as a research laboratory.
The space station is our orbiting platform. It's a place to study what space is like and perform scientific experiments in microgravity while still being able to get to Earth relatively quickly and bring things up relatively quickly.
But is it possible that one of the space station's secret functions is to monitor UFO activity?
The Department of Defense in the United States, they look at everything as a potential military advancement, whatever it is. So it's possible that on board the International Space Station, there is an entirely different mission statement than what we are told.
The International Space Station is important in terms of the UFO phenomenon because for around 20 years, we've had these elite personnel, astronauts and scientists out there in the front line. So when these people say that they've seen something, you can take that to the bank.
April 2004. A live streaming video feed is activated.
The high-definition Earth viewing cameras on the International Space Station allow us to take pictures of the Earth and video as the space station orbits every 90 minutes.
But when the footage is reviewed 12 years later, it creates a media storm. A UFO in the form of a translucent square is clearly seen near the center of the frame.
It's a definite object that's out there. It seems unusual, for sure, in the distance. And what's particularly interesting is that after a very short time of recording it, the video just goes blue. And you could think, once again, this is a case of NASA just cutting short a transmission of something that shouldn't be there.
The astronauts have seen and continue to see objects in space that do not appear to be terrestrial. They do not appear to be our technology. And then the question becomes, whose technology are they?
And unexplained sightings by NASA's astronauts continue to grow. June the 30th, 2015. 3 separate UFOs are spotted leaving Earth's atmosphere and flying into space. Some of this footage has never before aired on television.
It's obvious that they're moving at thousands of miles per hour. Has to be. There's no other way. These are highly, rapidly moving objects coming from Earth, converging from radically different points of origin. NASA has said that these are satellites transiting Earth, but these look like they're coming up from the Earth and coming up at angles that are just hard to explain as satellites.
They're moving in unison with the same goal in mind, and I believe that this is excellent proof that there is something taking place in outer space that probably has intelligence behind it.
3 UFOs are seen heading into the same sector of outer space. Moments later, the video feed is lost.
NASA and some other imagery experts have suggested that quite a lot of these films actually show little more than dust or ice particles, that it's very difficult for people to look at these sorts of films and be sure whether they're looking at a massive object far away or a very, very small object close to the lens.
Some researchers believe there's an alternative explanation for these UFO sightings.
The reality is there are literally tens of thousands of pieces of space junk, just trash that's literally littered our upper atmosphere that's in orbit. And it includes pieces of dead spacecraft, satellites that have gone offline. So, did they really see an alien craft? Or did they just see maybe one of the millions of different space debris objects that are up there? we may never know.
Then on July the 9th, 2016, yet another UFO is seen entering Earth's atmosphere. Again, the video is interrupted.
It seems almost every time there's an intriguing piece of footage from the International Space Station, something goes wrong and the feed is mysteriously cut. Now, is this censorship? Is classified information being deleted, withheld from the public? Or is it just equipment malfunctions? We don't know.
NASA claims the video feed suffers regular outages as the space station passes out of range of relay satellites. But is this really the case?
These issues have happened so many times, you have to draw the conclusion that they are really doing this to keep information from the public.
Does evidence gathered by the cameras of the International Space Station suggest that UFOs really do inhabit our world? UFO researchers believe NASA may have a hidden agenda.
Given the repeated accounts from astronauts of seeing these extraterrestrial craft, perhaps there is a very concerted attempt by NASA to establish communication with these beings.
I do believe the ISS is doing legit research, but I also believe that the ISS could be a platform for communication with non-human intelligences.
The question has always been with the International Space Station, does it have a secret mission? Is it up there doing more than just the public front view kind of stuff that they show us? Is there a possibility that it is some sort of early space intruder detector kind of craft that's designed to look for UFOs or alien spacecraft? That actually makes more sense than you might think, because there's a long history of NASA missions having secret agendas.
As humans continue to push out and explore the distant reaches of space, UFO researchers believe this will only increase the possibility for contact. Contact for which we may already have proof. Sightings by US astronauts have provided some of the most compelling evidence of the existence of UFOs. Is it possible that an alien intelligence is trying to communicate with us? Or have they done so already? August 2005. NASA launches the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. On board is an advanced camera system, the high-resolution imaging science experiment, also known as HiRISE.
The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter orbits around Mars, taking images of its surface.
Its ultra-powerful telescope has enabled the orbiter to photograph Mars's terrain in unprecedented detail.
The HiRISE instrument has a resolution of about 1 foot on the surface of Mars, so we get some really great pictures of Mars from this orbiter.
Then, on July the 13th, 2016, news breaks that astronomers using HiRISE have discovered formations on the Martian surface that bear a striking resemblance to Morse code.
Morse code was developed in the 19th century as essentially a binary code. It's a way of quickly encoding a lot of textual information through a series of dots and dashes. The US military still trains a number of people each year in Morse code, and that's because it's still the easiest and most reliable way to transmit information over distance.
Images coming from the HiRISE instrument on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter saw dark dunes on the surface of Mars. Some of them elongated and some of them more like dots. Our best guess for what formed these is winds coming from different directions.
Despite NASA's attempt to explain the phenomena, the agency admits the dune formations are very complex, making it difficult to determine exactly what caused their formation.
Scientists don't really know exactly how to explain this. We don't have anything on Earth that looks like this. So the question is, what causes it? Is it natural or is it artificial?
It's as if somebody kind of dug up around a bunch of land and created this dot dash pattern. Now, there's no explanation for this geologically. NASA has described it, but NASA has a tendency to suggest that the description of something is the same thing as explaining something. It's not explainable.
For UFO investigators, the satellite images raise significant questions. What if the strange formations are the result of something other than natural atmospheric processes or geological activity? What if they were created by an intelligent species that once lived on the red planet?
Now, is this Morse code proof of a past intelligent civilization, or is this something that science just has yet to explain? We're dealing with an alien world. We don't know everything on the Martian surface.
If those features on the Martian surface are Morse code, then two questions arise. Firstly, who sent the message? And second, what does it say? Now, experts in Morse code have actually looked at these Martian features, and they've been unable to decode it. It doesn't seem to correspond to any language that we know, but maybe it's not written in our language at all. Maybe it's written in somebody else's language, and that we can only guess at.
When the geologic explanations don't add up, and yet you can't really say that it is something artificial, you're kind of stuck in the middle. It's a genuine mystery what that stuff is, and NASA's explanation certainly is not adequate.
We've been searching for life on Mars, and we absolutely can't rule out that there was once life on Mars. We think about 3.5 billion years ago, Mars may well have had water at the same time that life was blossoming on Earth.
This compelling new evidence of oceans, rivers, and lakes on Mars adds to an emerging picture of the red planet as once being a habitable world.
Given what we know that took place with the water billions of years ago on the planet, we have to take this into account that there could have been a civilization that's now extinct, and there still might be life on that planet.
I do believe that Mars was inhabited at one point, and what we see on the surface today is remnants of that civilization.
Whilst we wait for a manned mission to land on Mars, our satellites, space telescopes, and probes continue to scour the far corners of the cosmos for life.
Curiosity seems to be inextricably linked with intelligence. We look out into the universe and we ask, what's out there? And I think it's possible that others out there are looking back at us.
UFO researchers believe that we need to look no further than our own skies and planetary neighborhood for evidence of alien intelligence. And that the pilot and astronaut sightings, combined with interrupted NASA transmissions, provide proof of conspiracy and cover-up. They are in no doubt that the mountain of unexplained evidence and inadequate official explanations point to one inescapable fact: that UFOs are real.